Osiam. Hoichaka Tanoyap. Tasea Hochet. Chikomantomi, Ea Unaxwit. Hakot Mainoch, die Kokoinstalmoch. Die Swaamchit, die Nata Koikoin. Die Hatli noch Nauiel. Die Hatli Snuail. Die Stalmoch Ech Ancha. Witchit Iem te Awen. I asked the Squawinchit, he Huipe an. Is kon mail te wan. Die Stochchit. Ech Swatis men Humps. Die Hatli noch Neo. Die Kap Ayas. Witchit noch Chouch ausstreit. Noch Ayat away. Hatli Skokoyen so zwit. Tanoyap tan Sequetals. Die Chikumantomi. Die Kham Tsets ab. Tahir Kaksen Siachin. They did not take my language away. I want to thank our elders, our beautiful words of advice that has been handed down to us to come here in peace today. Thanking you, Siam, to our beautiful elders from the Tzalewatol, the Chomathkoyam, the Skomish, the Tsawasan, the Elkswat, the Akwetals, all of you, my beautiful relatives. It was a very heavy morning, and I'm sure you felt like I did, that heavy feeling, the Cham Tzale. Choipe an, ask you all to take a breath, the Pichwin, that sacred breath that connects us, Elkswat, the Chacha'anak, the Slatlakwa'eos, the connection to all of creation. Really want to commend the commissioners for the work that they have achieved in finding our voice once again, in empowering our elders across this beautiful land. I want to thank our elders, all of those that had the courage to shed light on our darkness over this country. While I sat here watching this morning, I thought of my late grandfather, Chief Lawrence Baker, who attended Seashelt, and that it was the strength of our elders to retain our languages and our culture. And I believe our languages should be one of the utmost upheld and honored steps forward for this country to take in revitalizing what they attempted to take away, our connection to our lands and to each other through our languages. I also thought of our relatives elsewhere, our Maori relatives in Aotearoa, our families in Australia, those throughout North America, Turtle Island, South America, because they are no different. They had also gone through the modus operandi of colonization and the methods that were used to attempt to usurp our power. Why? Why did they do this? It was to access our resources and to generate wealth. And we see it continuing to this day. The desire, the gold rush mentality, succession of gold rush mentality to come into our territories, to marginalize and displace First Nations people in order to continue a pollution-based economy. These are not separate issues. Unless there is significant change in laws and policies, legislation in this country, then an apology means nothing. For we have visited many of the Indigenous peoples in those countries I spoke of. They are in the same canoe of reclaiming our strength. There is a huge resurgence in our young people. There is a hunger in our youth. My fiancée, Shaman Sot, says that our children are not at risk. They are culturally deprived. They are culturally deprived by design. And that day has come and gone. We are in a post-colonial era. Now it is up to Canadians to not choose complacency, for that is unacceptable. We all must put our paddles in the water to move forward. So I commend each of you again, our beautiful elders from our territories, for your strength and perseverance. We have many chapters of change and transformation in every one of our family stories. And this modern chapter is no different. The trickster is alive and well, and it is up to us to grow and learn and transform, not through assimilation, but adaptation. And that is the strength not isolated to us as Coast Salish of this land, but to us as human beings. So I thank each and every one of you for the beautiful morning. I want to raise my hands in gratitude to our Mayor, Gregor Robertson, and his council for their courage and vision to announce a city of reconciliation. Hosiam, hoichakasiam. I also want to thank our dear Chief, Robert Joseph, for his vision, Reconciliation Canada, the march that took place here a number of months ago to see 70,000 of our citizens step forward in this beautiful city of ours and stand in strength and unity in Chotmote. That was truly a momentous and historic day. So let's give them a round of applause as well. It is my great honor to welcome you to our shared territories of our Tsalewatos, our Chomathkoyam, and our Skochotmish, our three families in what is now downtown Vancouver. Kamkamalai is the traditional place name of this area, place of maple trees. Laklake is one of our transformers just to the west of us here. This land is laden with mythology and place names, burial grounds to this day that are left unprotected. As many people enjoy a quality of life, it is at the expense of Indigenous peoples of this land. We must demand a better future for our descendants. So welcome to our territories. Our history is your history, and it doesn't start in 1791 with the Spanish or the English. And this country is not founded on French and English. We must mature as a society and accept our true identity, a foundation of Indigenous peoples. That is why we welcome you here, to continue extending our hearts and our love in peace, that is a better vision, a shared vision for our collective future, is to come together in reconciliation and peace. So I stand here in that same unity with each of you to welcome you. I thought about what song we should sing today. The one that's in my heart is our warrior song, because of the strength of these elders that we've seen over the last many years. I feel it in my heart that it is appropriate to share this war song, not to go to battle, but to choose what is it we are fighting for. What are the values that we stand to uphold today? What is our shared values and our shared vision? And that is what this song represents to me today. This song comes from our great chief, Squamish Jim Sekamkane. It'd be an honor to share this with you to start our day, to welcome our panelists, all of our respected dignitaries. Osiam, Chinquamantomi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is LAURIE Anderson, and as Executive Director of Simon Fraser's Downtown Campus, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you and to thank Chief Campbell for that wonderful welcome. Please join me in thanking him for that. As you know, we are gathered here in the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and Simon Fraser is very pleased to be playing a small part in today's proceedings. I've been asked by the organizers to thank the sponsors, whose names are also up there as well, the people who have helped make today's event possible. The Ministry of Aboriginal Relations and Reconciliation, the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs, the City of Vancouver, Fortis BC, Port Metro Vancouver, and also to Vancity for their ongoing investment in Reconciliation Canada. Please join me in thanking them. Now, Simon Fraser is very pleased to be playing a small part in this, and some of you may have attended the dialogues that the university put on in the last couple of years related to the Truth and Reconciliation Committee and the work that they are doing. We also were very fortunate to be able to congratulate Chief Robert Joseph in winning and being awarded the prestigious Jack Blaney Award. And many of you here may have been at that event in the WASP Center for Dialogue. How many of you were at the Jack Blaney Award when Chief Robert Joseph was getting the award? Well, for those of us who were there, it was a stirring event, not only to recognize the work that the Chief had done, but also to see that he brought us all up standing and singing in an impromptu song along with his family. It was a beautiful event and something that all of us who were there will remember. At SFU's Center for Dialogue, we have a tagline that says, "We are trying to create space for transformative conversations." Today is one such event, and SFU is very pleased to be part of the proceedings. I want to welcome you all again and thank you for being part of this very, very important event. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take a moment to start by recognizing that this important and historic gathering is on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people. And I'm grateful that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been able to undertake this remarkable and difficult work. I'd also like to recognize and acknowledge Reconciliation Canada and the Planning Committee for their work to bring everyone together to witness this very important event. I wish that I could be there with you, but unfortunately I'm committed to be at another very important event with a First Nation in northern British Columbia. I want to recognize the First Nation leaders who are present, along with the many respected elders, community leaders, and community members. But I want to especially extend my thanks and respect to the survivors. We would not be here today without your extraordinary courage to tell your stories, to ensure all Canadians know and understand the full depth of injustices that were suffered during this dark period of our nation's past. Sharing the truth of what you and your families have endured because of residential schools takes courage, determination, and incredible resilience. Your collective voices have not only shed light on a tragic period of this nation's history, but also remind us of the challenges First Nation communities continue to face, and that we must all work to address our efforts to achieve reconciliation. What you have shared matters. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has ensured that your stories will never be forgotten or lost. As a nation, we are forever in your debt for your courage and your continuing to hold fast to your cultures, beliefs, and traditions. And here in British Columbia, we will be reading this Truth and Reconciliation Commission report and the recommendations with great interest to see how we can continue to work with you to achieve reconciliation. And as I know, the federal government, as well as leaders right across this nation from every jurisdiction, will also be doing the same. I can tell you that the government here in British Columbia remains steadfast committed to continuing the work we've been doing towards reconciliation. This day and this report will stand as a historic moment in Canadian history. Finding a path forward to new, respectful relationships will remain our shared vision and goal.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ginger GOSNELL-MYERS, and I am on the TRC Local Organizing Committee, also with the City of Vancouver, and I thank you for being with us today. Thank you to Chief Campbell for that welcome. Thank you to LAURIE for providing this incredible space and supports to ensure that we could gather today and collectively witness the Truth and Reconciliation's final event. And their wish for us here in Vancouver who could not be in Vancouver, or who could not be in Ottawa, was to gather, to be together, to witness their final recommendations together, and to support one another. We thought, as the TRC Organizing Committee, that it would be really important to gather the supportive leaders in our city and province who have been committed to reconciliation and who have great visions for how we need to move forward together. Our panelists that have agreed to be here are not only here to respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final recommendations, but they're here to give us some next steps and some ideas on how we're going to carry forward the mandate of the TRC, because as we know, reconciliation does not end with the closing of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It does not end with the end of our year of reconciliation, and it will continue on through our efforts as a city of reconciliation. And as Justice Sinclair said, our task is to ask ourselves, what can I do? Our panelists, we have printed off bios for each of you. Our panelists are Robbie Waisman, who is a Truth and Reconciliation Honorary Witness and Community Leader. We have Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson, also a TRC Honorary Witness. We have Jody Wilson-Raybould Wilson, who is the BC Assembly First Nations Regional Chief, also a candidate for Member of Parliament with the Liberal Party of Canada for the Granville riding. We have David Wong, who is a TRC Honorary Witness, also an architect and an author. We have Mary Fontaine, who's a Reverend with Hummingbird Ministries. We have with us Linda Morris, who is Senior Vice President for Vancity. And we have Doug White, who is Director of the Center for Pre-Confederation Treaties and Reconciliation with Vancouver Island University. Those are our panelists. They need to know further introduction. And once they're finished, we also have a really important and exciting announcement that's going to be delivered by Vancouver Island University President Ralph Nilsson. So with that, for those of you who feel that you need some health supports, we do have health support workers and a health support room set aside. Afterwards, we'll continue to gather and share refreshments. So with that, I'd like to call forward Robbie Waisman.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here this morning with all of you to move forward the healing and reconciliation. I am a Holocaust survivor, and I represent 4.5% of Jewish children that survive. 1.5 million were brutally murdered. And for 33 years, I kept quiet. I was busy in the community and doing all kinds of things, but never spoke about the Holocaust. Then I realized that I have a duty and obligation to speak and bring healing. And when I do this, I honor the memory of the 1.5 million that weren't as lucky as I was. We were 426 of us that couldn't go home, and we went to France to restart our life. And we were considered les enfants terribles, the terrible kids, because we were full of anger and we couldn't restart our life because we realized the losses. And it's so similar to the residential schools. But we finally found a way to move ahead. And although some of the experts thought that we would never amount to anything, I'm happy to share with you that Elie Wiesel, that was with me, is Nobel Prize winner. And little Lulek, who became the chief rabbi of Israel, and I can go on and on. That shows the resiliency of the human spirit. When I got involved with First Nations, I wrote an article about it recently, and I want to share this with you. Some 4 years ago, on September the 8th, I was invited to speak to the Dene Nation located in Fort Providence, some 300 kilometers north of Yellowknife. I was picked up in Yellowknife for the long trip by car to Fort Providence by two extraordinary women, Terry Brown and Rosa Washri. That in itself is a story worth writing about. My visit was intended to help with the healing process for many hundreds of First Nations who went through the agony of residential schools. The treatment of Indian residential school is a sad and shameful chapter in Canadian history. For more than a century, Indian residential schools separated over 150,000 Aboriginal children from their families and communities. In the 1870s, the federal government, partly in order to meet its obligation to educate Aboriginal children, began to play a role in the development of and administration of these schools. Two primary objectives were to remove and isolate children from the influx of their homes, families, traditions, and cultures, and to assimilate them into the dominant culture of white Anglo-Saxon. These objectives were based on the assumption Aboriginal cultures and spiritual beliefs were inferior and unequal. They did this to kill the Indian and the child as they were perceived as being savages. And 132 federally supported schools were located in every province and territory except Newfoundland, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island. These schools were operated by Anglican, Catholic, Presbyterian, or United Churches. This government-approved system in which very young children were often forcibly removed from their homes, often taken from their communities. These kids were inadequately fed, clothed, and housed. All were deprived of the care and nurturing of their parents, grandparents, and communities. There are horror stories I heard firsthand from survivors about physical, mental, and sexual abuse that defies understanding, particularly when you think that the educators were religious and with high moral values. Tragically, some of these children died while attending residential schools, and others never returned home. To this day, the residential school legacy has contributed to social problems. On my visit, I was privileged to participate in a fire ceremony where one by one stepped forward, offering dried pieces of fish, tobacco, meal, or bread, placing the foodstuff in front of the fire. Hymns were chanted, drums rhythmically accompanied the gathering in the middle of the field surrounded by lakes. Chief Bill Erasmus took me under his guidance, explaining the meaning of all that was done. With his help, I was privileged to participate in this most meaningful ceremony. I was totally overcome with the spirit of the hour, and I too was able to communicate with loved ones lost in the Holocaust. It was amazing and very touching. I was totally involved in this unbelievable atmosphere. My emotions, usually under control, gave way. My host, Terry Brown, took me to a memorial not far where we had the fire ceremony. There were some 600 names inscribed on the memorial, ranging in every age. I asked Terry where they were buried, and she told me that they were spread all over the fields in unmarked graves. And we might possibly stand on some of them right there. I was also told that parents would very often receive the same notice stating that be advised that your child died like an angel. How did I happen to go there in the first place is also interesting. When retired Chief David Ahaniku, the now infamous anti-Semitic outburst, the whole nation was in shock. The Canadian Jewish Congress was approached by many outraged First Nation leaders to express shame that one of their own could do such a horrible thing. As a gesture of goodwill and rapprochement, the Canadian Jewish Congress invited some of the leaders on a trip to Israel. The trip was extremely successful and an eye-opener for the entire group. Terry Brown, one of the participants, was very moved by everything she saw and wanted to do some things for the people towards the healing process. Wendy Lambert from Canadian Jewish Congress in Toronto suggested that perhaps a Holocaust survivor might be helpful. Indeed, she was right. When I ultimately shared my experience, as a Holocaust survivor, I was totally astonished and rewarded by the fact that some who never spoke about their horrible experience were encouraged to do so. They spoke in 6 different dialects coming from different tribes. There were booths set up in the rooms with translators wearing earphones at the same time. Other listeners' devices were made available for the rest of us in the room so that everyone could understand what was being said. I witnessed firsthand the tears, the heartfelt sighs, and the quiet personal reflection of the painful memories shared so openly with so many heartbreak. Having gone through the Holocaust gave me an opportunity to connect to the group. It was extremely rewarding and meaningful to be able to help so many in that closed environment in such a remote part of Canada. I was also privileged to make many friends with whom I still stay in contact. Some in remote territories never met a Jew and never knew about the Holocaust. I have since received many notes, excuse me, as follows. The Holocaust survivor changed my life. And another note one wrote, I read Night by Elie Wiesel. It touched me deeply. You and others who endure the horrors of war are examples of human resiliency. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Good day, everyone. I'm Gregor Robertson, the Mayor of Vancouver, and so honored to be here today. So thankful to be on the unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and very thankful that all of you have come in this show of strength once again here in Vancouver to see this depth of commitment and support for reconciliation that fills my heart with hope. And I think back to the many steps we've taken together over the past number of years with reconciliation at the heart of it. And then I think of what's been said this morning, what the commissioners said, what we've heard here in this room. And despite the tragedy, despite the despair, despite all of the negativity that is being so real in the stories told by all of the survivors, and I raise my hands to all of you, all the elders who've shared their stories, all of those who are living with that and sharing in whatever way they can. It's been an incredible gift to all of us, all of the people across this country and across the world, because all of us come from histories of struggle and oppression and people preying upon each other. It's been a long evolution for our people, and we're not there yet. And the stories that we hear right up till today are living proof of it. And they're also inspiration and motivation and hope. And that's what I've taken from so many of my direct experiences with this and what I felt today. The biggest outpouring of energy in this room happened when people talked about hope and humor and feeling good about this, despite how tragic it all is, that we have to cut right through that and focus on the positive, focus on the way forward, and the shared understanding that's so essential to evolving and living in harmony as many different cultures. So I'm very thankful for that. I'm thankful for the teachings and the healings that have been enabled by so many leaders, people in this room, people at the city. Ginger GOSNELL-MYERS, I need to recognize you for your leadership, and Deputy Mayor Andrea Reimer, two very powerful women at the City of Vancouver who've led many of the action steps that we've taken. We benefit from all of this leadership in so many different ways, And we have much to teach other cities. I'll just share with you that the mayor of Edmonton, Don Iveson, he has been in Ottawa this morning. He was witness there as the commission presented their findings and their recommendations. And what he shared in Ottawa this morning was the commitment of big city mayors across Canada. I've been very honored to be the chair of the big city mayors across our country, the 22 largest cities in Canada, and we, through Mayor Iveson, presented a joint statement that supporting the work of reconciliation and committing ourselves and our cities to learning and to acting and supporting all of the change that needs to take place. We obviously are right in the thick of it, in the front lines, particularly urban Aboriginal people who move around our country, have moved around due to circumstances, and we need to find ways to support people who are vulnerable, to support them on their healing journey, and make sure our cities, our communities are welcoming places, and that we connect the cultures from our First Nations who've taken care of this place since time immemorial to the newcomers who come here and don't have any of that history presented to them. We have to change that. We have to change that for all of us who've been here for some generations and don't know enough, but all get on the same path in our cities. That's where I see big hope and saw enormous support from mayors across the country. In all of the communities across the country, there's been support at local government level where I think we work very closely and are very committed to action. That said, we have a lot of work to do to make sure provincial governments and federal government do their part and take action. There's a huge gap right now, and these are important recommendations that I think strike right at the core of the need for the federal government to take meaningful action to ensure that they implement the next steps on the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which we were one of the last countries to adopt, shamefully. But we need to be on that course with action, urgent action, and support for people across this country who need that support. And it's an important time for this as we, in a democracy here, face a big choice in the next election. And I think most of us in this room want to see action from the federal government, the next federal government that we elect this fall. And that's an important action that we take, a responsibility that we take, and we need to be sure that our friends and neighbors, our families, all understand what's at stake in the election and what's being presented as options, as leadership steps. And that's certainly something I've wanted to be committed to as mayor, and being very clear about my intentions and my goals, and to strive as hard as I can as a leader in the community to make them realities. And we need to expect that of all levels of government, whether they're First Nations governments or local municipalities, provincial or federal. We need to hold them accountable, make sure they make solid commitments where action is needed, and we hold them accountable. And I see a very good timing from the recommendations, from all of the actions or all of these years, for all the survivors, all of the kids that came through this and that have inspired us to carry on and in support of the kids of our future, so that they never have to live through any of these horrors. And they have every chance in the world. That Aboriginal kids in this country have every single opportunity in front of them. That we support that as a society, and I'm hopeful that we're on that course, and we need to redouble our efforts, obviously, to make it a reality. So remember to vote. And with that, a big thank you, and I'll introduce Jody Wilson-Raybould. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, for the introduction. Gaelic Husla, good morning. I first of all want to acknowledge the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, the Squamish, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and I know that there are people here from Tawasin. Thank you, Chief Campbell, for the opening comments and the welcome and the song. My name is Jody Wilson-Raybould. My traditional name is Puglas, and I come from the Muskima, Dzawadenic, and Likwikta people of Northern Vancouver Island. I now make my home in Vancouver, and I'm very grateful and honored to have been included in this most esteemed panel to speak and provide some of my reflections as the outgoing regional chief of the BC Assembly of First Nations. But before I do that, I, of course, want to acknowledge all of the chiefs and the leaders in the room, all of the academics, citizens, but most of all, I want to acknowledge, and maybe you can stand up, all of the residential school survivors that are here. Thank you. So I wanted to lend my voice as regional chief and as a citizen in our community and welcome the findings and the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Findings that tell the story of the history of residential schools, the legacy of residential schools, and certainly the indelible scars that those schools have placed upon Aboriginal peoples. As was said by Chief or Justice Sinclair, during this dark period in Canadian history, over 100 years, more than 150,000 First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children were forcibly removed from their homes, and residential schools were created with the sole intent to take the Indian out of the child. Reportedly, over 6,000 children died at these schools. Many more were emotionally, sexually, and physically abused. And according to former Prime Minister Paul Martin, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Beverly McLaughlin, and now Murray Sinclair, and most certainly all of the residential school survivors, these schools were an act of cultural genocide. The last residential school closed in the mid-1990s, but their impacts are certainly far-reaching and long-lasting. So like most Aboriginal people, or all Aboriginal people, I've been affected by residential schools with many of my family and friends who either sent to them or have been impacted by their legacy in terms of intergenerational impacts. For Aboriginal peoples, this report is personal and deeply emotional as we are once again confronted with the negative, dark history and the dark truths in this country. Over the past 6 years as regional chief, I have been honored and humbled to attend many truth and reconciliation events, none more so moving than the one that I attended in Alert Bay to witness on the eve of the demolition of St. Michael's Residential School. Several of my family and my cousins here as well, including my grandmother, Pugladi, who is the matriarch of our clan and the person that, for the most, more than anybody else, taught me what it means to be an Aboriginal person and the responsibilities that we have in terms of moving forward into this country. She attended there. For me, the most poignant and hauntingly disquieting edifice that the survivors were throwing rocks at St. Michael's University, as it was our residential school, was completely symbolic. symbolic of the cultural tyranny that resulted from this residential school. With the release of the Truth and Reconciliation findings and the eventual final report, there will be much talk about what happens next. Looking at reconciliation through the lens of the residential school experience is both evocative and compelling. Perhaps it will be the lens through which all Canadians begin to empathize with the personal impact and pain the colonial system forced on Aboriginal people. Perhaps it can be a catalyst for change. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has made 94 recommendations, or what they call calls to action, which seek to address the continuing legacy of the residential schools. At a macro level, and as a matter of unfinished public policy, reconciliation is fundamentally about how Canada as a country still struggles to reconcile the pre-existence of Aboriginal peoples as distinct societies, as nations, within the assumed sovereignty of the Crown. Our highest courts have told us that we, as a country, must do this, must reconcile through processes developed jointly between the Crown and Aboriginal peoples. We need to bring life to and move beyond the residential school apology offered in 2008. We must move beyond words. It cannot be scattered programs or initiatives. It is a national project that requires the full engagement and commitment at the highest levels of government. To paraphrase the late Nelson Mandela, beyond the important and, of course, necessary work of truth-telling and of healing, reconciliation actually requires laws to change and policies to be rewritten. Where the legitimate institutions of Aboriginal peoples are recognized and empowered, and the laws they make enforceable. This transformative work in Canada is far from complete. Some positive steps have been made, but they are still too few and far between. In part, this is because there is no national framework to undertake the collective and important work of reconciliation. As many Canadians would be surprised to learn that there are few mechanisms to actually reconcile with Aboriginal peoples, even if there is the political will to do so. Federal policy is mostly not about reconciliation, and often at cross purposes with the whole concept. One of my primary focuses during my tenure as regional chief was to advance and develop the legal and political mechanisms to support reconciliation. There are solutions. There is even a plan. As part of this plan, we proposed a cross-government overarching reconciliation framework to guide all departments and ministries that was to be supported at the highest level in the Prime Minister's office. This would essentially operationalize what has been directed by the courts and what is set out in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. What is needed federally is for the Crown to adopt a plan developed in partnership with First Nations that, with all parties' support, survives the life of one government. To accomplish this requires leadership, conviction, courage, a deep understanding of the issues, and above all else, political will. The truth is, it has not always been expedient for political parties to champion Aboriginal issues. Today, this can no longer be the case. Being a responsible and ethical government requires addressing the colonial legacy and completing the work of federalism. Aboriginal peoples are the fastest growing demographic in Canada and must be full contributors to the economy. Aboriginal governments are also playing an increasingly important role in land use and other decisions that affect all Canadians. Aboriginal peoples are being called upon to take their rightful place with respect to natural resource development and governance within Canada. They are in a period of transition, just as our country is in a period of transition. One of the reasons why I became involved in mainstream politics was to help in this important work of reconciliation that is in the national interest, both socially and economically. As regional chief, I realized that without committed partners in Ottawa, this work would never get done or done properly. We need lawmakers that realize how important it is, or that this transition is, and need to be successful for all Canadians. This is not simply an Aboriginal issue. The future of Aboriginal peoples and all Canadians is intertwined. This work must be accelerated. There is a growing lack of trust among some Aboriginal people, particularly our youth, and major proposals in resource development increase the pressure. As a country, we still have a long way to go, both to heal and to change the legal framework under which Aboriginal peoples coexist in Canada, where all peoples can see their reflection when looking in the mirror of our Constitution. But we are making progress. The work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is evidence of this. And I, for one, am hopeful, very hopeful. But this is hard work, and it will take the efforts of all Canadians. Reconciliation is not an event. It is a state of being. It is a process of building relationships. The real question that we have to ask ourselves is, as a country, are we truly ready to reconcile? As a proud Aboriginal person and as an equally proud Canadian, I think we are. Yela Kasta.
Thank you, Judy. Yes, we need a leader like Jody in Ottawa. My name is David Wong. Wong. My name translated means Wong, see the sky. That was a name given to me at birth. It's a name I'm privileged to share. It was given to me from the people of this land, because my family has a relationship with our First Peoples. I'm very honored to be here. I was asked to be an honorary witness. Truthfully, I had no clue what that meant. Okay? Started 3-4 years ago when I was first asked. Then 2 years ago, it began. I'm here to share my experiences over the past 2 years. I'm going to start with my grandmother, my elder, my beautiful grandmother, who I watched as a young person. I guess I was about 6 or 7 years old, and I remember some strangers in our house. I didn't know who they were. I was too young to understand. But I knew they weren't Chinese, because my grandmother only spoke Chinese to me. She was really trying with her gestures to help these people. Didn't know who they were. Grandma gave them food and shelter. I knew later on, as I grew up, they were some of the First Nations people who sought help, and Grandma did what she can to help strangers. That was my first experience of watching through action. And this is what my story is going to be about today. What can we do? It's about knowledge. What's important about knowledge? I'd like to share what Grandma mentioned to me. She used to say, David, knowledge is not knowledge unless it is shared. I'd like to add to what Grandma said, is that it follows with action. Although words are easy to come by, but they disappear. That's why I brought along with me today a gift from the TRC. When I was an honorary witness 2 years ago, I was given this pouch. Inside the pouch was something I didn't expect. Let me reach into this pouch and talk about the gifts inside. Can you see this? Can everyone see this? It's a rock, right? But it's a beautifully painted rock. It's a moccasin. Here's the front of the moccasin, and here's the back of the moccasin. When I first received this gift from the TRC, I didn't know what it really meant. Because I'm an architect, I appreciate works of art. I do understand what it means now. It represents the young people at the residential school, the lives affected by the residential schools. It also meant the journey, the steps taken. This is what this rock means to me. That's one of many gifts that I received. The gift of knowledge and the gift of sharing my story and to hear the stories from our respected survivors and our elders. I attended the entire, I think it was 4-day session at Hastings Park, the P&E, when the City of Vancouver graciously hosted a year of reconciliation. I was there for every single testimony or sharing of heartfelt stories from the elders. I'm an East Side kid. I grew up in East Vancouver. I like to think of myself as a tough kid, okay? Right? You know, I don't like to show my emotions very much as a young person. I listened to the stories, and I thought about what it meant. They were just numbers to me, okay? Even right now, even though we all hear about residential schools, we hear about First Nations communities and the wrongs and the injustices, but really, how do we connect ourselves to these stories? When you watch and see elders crying with their grandchildren and their children holding them up, it's really hard, okay? Really, really hard to see. You can say it broke my heart, whatever, but I thought about it. I can't imagine if some government agent came to my house and ripped away my 2 precious boys from my arms. You know, I'd be really damn angry if that happened. And it did happen. And then to find out later on that they died or they were abused, I can't imagine that. And this is what I'd like to challenge everyone. We have to understand there are numbers, but there are lives. These are real people, human beings, with the same heart that we all have. That's what happened in the past. What happened was that I couldn't take it anymore. In front of national television, they caught me crying. I was bawling my butt off. It was really embarrassing. I attended my first smudge ceremony. The gentleman who brought me to tears was there. He told me it's okay. After experiencing that smudge, it felt felt peaceful. And I like to think of myself as a person who's connected to the earth. I am a biologist by training, but I didn't really understand spirituality. It was at the Forum building when I gave my presentation that day, and I was sponged again by two elders. And they told me my grandfather and my grandmother were there with me, and they can see them. And they said, David, thank you. And what was really interesting, really cool afterwards was that I was told there's an eagle or two eagles on top of the building that same day when I was talking. It really blew my mind. So here I am right now. What's a person of Asian descent standing here talking about residential schools? What is my ancestors, what did we do to our First Nations people? And what did the colonial folks do to the Asians? You know, I want to speak because I look in the audience, and we're in a city respected for its diversity. I think over 40% are Asian, but I don't see those numbers reflected here in the audience. So in 2 years, here's what I've been trying to do. I made a pledge that I'll take this message to the community I'm associated with. I'm having success, not with people of my generation or my father's generation, but with our young people, because young people are wise. You know, I was in Toronto for the TRC thing in November, and Elder Barney Williams of the New Chalnet shared a story. Barney said, you know, my little granddaughter came up to me, because we all know I have health issues with my heart. And she held my hand and said, Grandpa, I know why your heart hurts, because you give away too much love. Young people are wise, and they can be the messengers. I was invited to speak with the Paiute people, the Lakota, because they were very happy, and they had heard about the Walk for Reconciliation. 70,000 of all of us were there. I'm really proud. And they wanted me to speak and talk about it. I brought all my photographs and everything down here. And they gave me a lot of wonderful gifts again. But you know, all the gifts that was given to me got stopped by the border agency. Okay? The honey, the jars of wild honey, the sweet grass, the sage, all that wonderful stuff were all taken away. That really ticked me off. But you know what they left me? There's one thing they couldn't take away. It's also in my pouch. I want you to hear it again. Let me reach into this pouch and show you what the young people gave me. Can you all see this? It's hard to see. It's one word. It says love. We can get angry and talk about how unjust it was, because I also am a descendant of head taxpayers and of people who built the Canadian Pacific Railway. We can be angry, but I watch the dignity of residential school survivors. I heard their stories, and then this fellow I call my uncle now, Chief Robert Joseph, Uncle Bobby as I call him. This guy never stopped smiling, right? He never stopped smiling. He's the ambassador for the Truth and Reconciliation effort. He smiles because he's full of love, just like Elder Barney and another friend and elder I met, a gentleman by the name of Eugene Arcand from Saskatchewan, of Cree heritage. These are people I met, and they all are full of forgiveness. And that's how you can beat this, because through knowledge, through learning, and through showing that we're above all this, that as a people, as a human race, we're above all this nonsense that had happened in the past. And I would like to ask our leaders, our elected leaders, to do the right thing. The UN Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights is a first step. The missing woman, Indigenous woman, sorry, I just know the MMIW. That's what they call it. Let's not waste our time, okay, and talk. Let's do something, right? So it's been 2 years. I'd like to share with you some of the joy I've had in the past 2 years. For the first time in my knowledge in North American history, my family society, the Chinese society, take photographs. They take what we call family photos. We had a First Nations leader, Kevin B., who welcomed everyone to the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. That was really cool. We also invited our Japanese Canadian community, and Aboriginal leaders were all there. There were over 600 people showed up for that photo event that day. We could only fit about 300 into the photo. But that's a start. We're also now, because I wrote a graphic novel on the history of the Chinese in North America, we're doing the same now with Aboriginal young people. And I'm working with people in the arts and culture community now to collaborate. Asian Canadian arts and cultural communities and organizations, we're now collaborating with First Nations youth across Canada. We're connecting up because it's the strength of the TRC, the people I met. That's where the strengths come in, because we can connect all our networks together. It's a start, but I'm gonna finish my dissertation, my little long-winded greeting with now my third and last gift I'd wish to share. It's on my hand. It's a cedar woven bracelet given to me by a young woman from the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. It's a sign of friendship and a sign of thank you. This is more meaningful to me than anything else you get. Everything else is just stuff. But I've learned something about this cedar bracelet. It's not permanent. It will essentially decompose. These things are permanent. The journey is a permanent journey. Love is also permanent, like the rock. This thing here is symbolic, because when I'm gone, because I'm not permanent, but my children and my descendants will be, as are our First Peoples descendants. The friendship will be renewed again. And it will happen to all of us. So to everyone here, Osiyam, thank you.
I'm Reverend Mary Fontaine. They call me Reverend. At Hummingbird, most of the people who are younger than me call me Auntie Mary. It's part of our tradition to be in a relationship, and it's not being way up above anybody else. It's about our relationship with one another. I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for all the wonderful people who are here to support this event. I'm very, very pleased that my elders are here with me today, who have also attended residential school. I am from the Mistawasses First Nation in Saskatchewan, from the Treaty 6 territories. And I didn't go to residential school, but I survived the Indian Act. A lot of things that we can say about that. I had a lot of help, though. I had help. I didn't go to residential school because our chief, our Treaty 6 chief, decided to call the missionaries in to come and start a school in our reserve. He called the Catholics, they didn't come. The Anglicans came for a while and left, brought a missionary and he left. And then we had the Presbyterians were settling in our land in the Prince Albert area. And they sent someone from Ireland. His name was, he came to be known as John McKay Buffalo Hunter because he used to go hunting with our chief and he was one of his friends. So I'm grateful for the Presbyterian Church for sending someone like that to come and be a friend. And because of that little school in our reserve, my parents didn't have to go to residential school, and I didn't have to go to residential school. But not everybody escaped from that tragedy. A lot of our kids, a lot of our people did go to residential schools. But of course, we lost our lands. The Cree Nation once spread around all 3 provinces, over 120,000 acres of land. We lost our land, we lost our economy. My parents, I had very good parents. I'm very, very lucky. I feel very, very blessed that I had the parents that I had. It gave me the vision for healing our people, to do what I could to bring healing for our people. I didn't know when I was growing up that our people suffered a lot. Because even though we were very poor, we had lived in a log house that my dad built. Everything in the house was something that he built. So when the elders used to pray and they'd say, "Kitimaksiakoma," you know, and I used to look around at our little shack and think, oh yeah, we're really poor. But it took me a while to realize he was talking about our spiritual poverty, our poverty as human beings. That no matter how hard we try, and even though we know what's right, you know, we're gonna fall by the wayside. We're not gonna quite reach that. Whether we are from the medicine wheel tradition or we're from the Christian tradition, you know, no matter how high we set our goals, we always, as in the Christian words, fall short of the glory of God. So we tried to make things, my parents did everything they could to survive as Cree people, to keep our identity, to keep our culture. My dad absolutely refused to take what he called white man's rations, because we had an Indian agent living in our reserve. And he watched over us, made sure that we didn't have our Sundances, but that didn't stop my mom. She was a strong Presbyterian, and she loved Jesus, but she also loved her culture. She challenged her ministers and said, you know, I'm going to go take my kids to a Sundance and have them blessed, and I want you to pray for me. I mean, you did that, you know. So I got the experience of a Sundance, and I remember that long, slow journey to the Sundance in a wagon, you know, slow wagon, and my little brother's full of energy, Dad letting them run along behind the wagon every once in a while. And they were saying, be quiet, be good, Mom is praying. Mom was praying for about 14 days. She was fasting and praying. And we went to that Sundance. You know where the Sundance tree was? In the bush. It was hidden. And my mom and dad said, now there's going to be a tree over there. You stay away from it. And so as we get to the camp, we're all setting up, and my brothers, they couldn't wait to get away. They headed straight for the bush, came and got me. We found the tree, we found the tree. And of course, though, I didn't let them touch any of the ribbons or anything like that. We have a beautiful tradition as First Nations people, as Cree people, as Coast Salish people that I've come to know here. We have beautiful, beautiful traditions, as the late Chief Dan George has said so eloquently in his little book, and I quote him so often because his theology and my mom's theology was very much the same. Our cultures are beautiful, our spirituality is beautiful. And he said, you know, he talked the story about gaffing for a fish. You respect the land. You respect everybody as your brother and sister. Relationships are about kinship. There's so many beautiful things. And there was a time when I was so angry with the church that I could not even go inside a church. This was after I studied at University of Alberta. My dad had said, my girl, you go out, get an education, do what you can. Our people suffer a lot. But when I was growing up, I didn't really know what he meant by that. I remember that day when he had to take white man's rations. I remember that he went and hitched up his horses and had to go with Mom to get that bag of flour. And he didn't want to do that. He just said no. But when my mom said, I'm not going out there to haul that sack of 50 pounds of flour on my back, you had to come with me. So he went, of course. So then she was quite an amazing woman. So was my dad. He had a heart for justice for our people. He knew we suffered. So I went to school. I learned all about the Indian Act. I learned about what the church had done to us. And I grew up in the Presbyterian Church, and I was felt very deceived by what I learned about what was happening in the residential schools, but also what was happening in my own life just under the Indian Act, the oppression that we went through, the injustices, the poverty, all those things. And the loss of hope when they took away, then the 60s scoop came along and they took away a bunch of kids. And they were talking about the kids that their friends lost their kids, the government came and got them. See, I survived. I'm a survivor too. We all survive because we believe, because there's something in us that won't die. We will not accept those invitations to die. There's so many of those. Racism, poverty, name calling, all those many thousands of things. I went way off my script, so if I run out but there is that day, I wanted to share that story about how my dad took those rations that day, and he left. He went to go take care of his horses, and he didn't come back till the evening. And I can imagine what he must have been going through. As any man who has lost the privilege of being able to take care of his own family. We did everything we could to survive without taking welfare, everything. We had a garden, Dad hunted, he trapped, he did everything he could, but it just wasn't there anymore. But Mom, that day, came home and she cooked a bannock and sat us around the table. I think there were 7 of us at that time. I come from a family of 11 children, and so at that time there was about 7 of us. And Mom cooked us bannock. There was nothing to eat with it. And she goes, okay, kids, come and eat. We've got, that nice Indian agent even gave us some meat to eat with our bannock. So she's opening up this can of Spam or something. And, so I go and I'm sitting with her, and then all of a sudden she goes, and she just grabs it and she runs out, and she had opened a can of maggots. So she ran out the door with it. So we had bannock that day. So when I went to school at U of A, took 4 years of, I also lost my status. I became one of those Bill C-31 because I married a non-treaty person. And so I learned all these things, and it was like a healing journey to learn all these things, to know and understand what my dad meant when he said our people suffer a lot, because I could relate those policies, that Indian Act, and all those different versions of the Indian Act, and how they played out in my family, and how the church had a hand in that I had a harder time with. So when the other story I wanted to tell you was when I was in that anger, when I was going to school at the University of Alberta. I was so angry at the church and I was attending a church at that time in Edmonton, but I couldn't stay there. I couldn't go inside that church anymore. Because before the minister had come to that church, I had started getting everybody in a circle. Circle is very important to our people. That's the way we think. That's our worldview. So I tried to get people, when we did Bible study and did things like that, we would, we were talking our language. But when this guy came, he put us back into the neat little rows. So I was really mad at him. And I had a hard time talking to him because of my anger. And so I used to sit in the back of the church where the street people sat in the out part of the church. I guess they didn't feel good enough to go inside. I don't know. They just felt more comfortable sitting on the outskirts of the church service. So I sat out there. I got to know them. And then one day, though, I realized that I had to do something about my anger. And it was the traditions, it was the teaching of my elders that helped me out of it. But first, I want to share this. While I was back there, I think the pastor was trying to talk me to come back into the church because he knew I was struggling, or I don't know. So he asked me if I would share, because in that particular church, women are not allowed to be ministers, and it just wasn't, you couldn't teach or be a leader in church and all that stuff. But he asked me to share. And I said, even that bugs me. But I decided, okay, I'll share. And this is what I shared. It was Easter time. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Hey, 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 And one man, only one man, there was total silence in the church. Not one word. But one man got up from the back of the church and he stood up and he clapped and he said, "It's about time, it's about time." One man. And the pastor ignored me. His wife threw daggers, looks at me, and even my best friend wouldn't talk to me. So I said, okay. So I grabbed my coffee, but the pastor's brother was there. He was from Vietnam. And the missionaries have a different perspective when they've worked with a different culture, I find. Anyway, he came running up to me through the people, and he said, "Mary, I got to talk to you." I said, "Oh, you're not happy?" He said, No, right on, that's great. I said, "Oh, your brother doesn't think so." He said, "Never mind, he'll get over it. And so what happened is about 6 months down the road, the pastor asked if he could talk to me, and he asked me if I would teach them that song. So there was an opening there. So I told you about my dad's passion for justice, and I want to share with you about my mom's passion for her culture and how she, how you think of your mom in a certain way. After she died, one of the ministers said, "You know that your mom used to challenge us about the Bible." And he said she used to ask deep theological questions. He was from Hong Kong that nobody could answer. And but the kind of questions she asked were like, but God gave us a culture and a language and a way of life. Why then would we dishonor him and by throwing it all away? It doesn't make sense. So I always compare my mom's story with the late Chief Dan George in that way, because he also believed that there were some beautiful things in our cultures. So what can we do? What does reconciliation mean? I think the things that my parents experienced are still being experienced today. Poverty. Well, we used to have a well. We didn't have running water when I was growing up. Tells you how old I am, or how poor we were. The housing, the lack of freedom, the loss of land, the loss of economy, the loss of children, these days through foster care, big time. The loss of our women, missing and murdered women. People, we lost my own niece out of Edmonton when she was 11, 12 years old. So these things are very close to me. But we found her. My brother looked, searched, and searched until he found her. We never gave up. But some can never be found because we don't know what happened or what is happening. So I'm really pleased about that recommendation today, that something needs to be done. Find out what's at the root of this. Stop it. Do what we can. Our women must not keep on being murdered and missing. Reconciliation means the attitude has to change. Racism and prejudice need to be addressed, especially concerning our children in schools. Me and the elders work with children in Surrey, and we hear stories that how they are treated by some of the new Canadians, and how terrible it is, how awful and just very traumatic it is for some of the children. And some of the people in Tsawwassen have the same problem. Prejudice, racism, bad attitudes. We need to educate all Canadians, starting from the time they're little, about our history, about what we're going through. You know, one of our little kids last week was told, "Oh, get out of here, just go back to your own country." So, you know, it just shows the ignorance out there. So Canada's got to do something. The schools have to educate, start teaching Native studies at grade 1. Now, we did we do arts and music and all those. We find all kinds of ways to bring people together with First Nations. You know, at one church where I was at the very beginning of Hummingbird Ministries, this woman said, "What's with those Indians anyway? They always just stick to themselves," you know. And now we have this Hummingbird Ministries, come. We're not sticking to ourselves. We invite you to come and dance with us. We teach powwow, we teach Métis, we dance, we sing, we drum, we do all those things. And we also invite other cultures to come and bring their drums and their cultures together with us. A way to cut those barriers down. We have healing circles. People can express freely what they're feeling. We have a Healing Path program. We invite different people to come and talk about whatever their expertise is. We've had one on budget. We listen to what the people want, and we try to respond by bringing someone in to talk about these various things. And in that way, saying that we're not telling anybody how to heal. We're walking with people. We're saying, if we can be helpful in any way, let us know how. And so the kids, we really, really have a heart for the kids. We're teaching them how to sing and dance and be proud of who they are, know their history, learn about the First Nations elders with me. We tell stories. We talk about scriptures in the Bible. We talk about how the teachings of Jesus are not much different from the teachings of Medicine Wheel. Very, very, as far as the values go and as far as how we live our lives, there's no difference. The only difference is that, well, one is written and one is not, and well, there are other differences too. But so I also want to say that reconciliation means reconciling spiritual and theological perspectives of Christians and First Nations. There needs to be conversations towards a better understanding. Many of our people have taken big strides towards this end, but there are still people in those pews that are a long way from being willing to listen to the Indigenous view of Christianity, the Indigenous view of Jesus. When you look at it from my perspective, there isn't much difference, as I mentioned before, between the medicine wheel people who try to do what they know is right and the Christians who try to do what they know is right. So no matter how well we know the teachings, we can still fall short. It's a human thing. My mushum used to pray like that, when I was young. I'm pleased, though, and hopeful at the signs that I see. I study at the Vancouver School of Theology to get my Master Divinity, and we were encouraged to include our culture and our spirituality in our studies, and that really helped me to get through a lot of the barriers. I'm also pleased that the Presbyterian Church made a confession before God and Aboriginal people in 1994, but more importantly, I'm glad that I was able to call them on that and say, okay, let's start a new ministry called Hummingbird Ministries. Yeah. And they went along with it, and they've even been in operation since 2005. I'm also pleased with what I saw downtown on Sunday. The ecumenical church is getting together and having that celebration to celebrate this event of the Truth and Reconciliation. I'm pleased with the gradual change of attitude that I see in places. We work with United Church in Richmond. We work with several Mennonite churches. We work with several churches and work with other organizations as well. And it's hopeful. Things are changing. Listening to the Spirit in these times. Can't understand my writing, but anyway. So when I think of all these things and I think of this new era coming, or I'm hopeful that something new is going to happen, something important, something good, that there's going to be reconciliation, that there's going to be true reconciliation, true friendships happening. We see it at Hummingbird. We have many non-Indigenous people, friends who come and come to our events and become part of our community, become friends with us, like real friends, not just we'll see you once in a while kind of thing. They come to our events, and some come to our programs, our music programs regularly. And so while I was writing this, I was thinking, have you ever seen Dances with Wolves? You remember the town crier? He comes to the top of the mountain and he's yelling at them. I couldn't figure out what he was saying, but I was trying to figure out now, if we had a town crier here listening to all of TRC, what's happening here and throughout Canada, what would he be saying? So he rides up on his wild horse to the top of the mountain, maybe up here at Squamish, and begins to shout, and he says, "Don't let them bury those stories. Don't let them bury those stories. Keep them alive, keep them alive. And don't forget. Don't throw away. Don't lock the doors and throw away the keys. Find ways to love one another. And what are you willing to do to reconcile? Do something. Genuine love," says Chief Dan George, "and forgiveness. Beyond forgiveness, I think First Nations have to do this one thing. We have to stop shrinking away and believing all those ugly invitations to die. I think we have to stand proud and say, this is me, you can take it or leave it. And you know what? I don't believe a word of what you're saying about me or my people because it's just not true. It's just that you don't understand. We have to say, like that lady said this morning, we have to stop. Well, she didn't use the word victim mode, but I think a lot of our people are in victim mode. And I know the pain is great. I know it. I've experienced it. But you know what? At a certain point, we have to stand up and say, we're not taking this crap anymore, okay? I think that's one thing that is a very, very important step, a very important thing to do, not to accept the stuff that we are given, the negative stuff. We need to give ourselves that strength. And a lot of that strength comes through the returning to our traditions, you know, drawing on our spirituality. Like I said, when I had to get over that anger, what helped me was a long time ago when my mom sent me on my first mission across the creek at midnight or at night to go and bring condolences to a family who had lost someone. Me and my little brother going across in a log in the creek, and it's dark and we're scared because somebody died and it's dark. And when we go there, and the old men used to sit around on the floor and they would tell stories. Very, very important that people laugh during that time. And they kept telling funny stories. Sometimes you hear the same stories over and over again, but you always laughed anyway. It was always funny. And so that night, he told that story. He said, "Gaik soa sik, Mr. Henma." He said, "Don't be angry. Don't hold anger in your heart because it will destroy you," he said. It will infect everything in your life. It's like a cancer. Don't do that. Let it go. So I have no idea how hard it was to let go and forgive that pastor that I didn't like. And lot of things about the church I didn't like. A lot of things about the church I also love. I love the person of Jesus Christ because to me he's like an elder, a very kind old mushroom that takes me by the hand and tells me what's right, gives me the strength to go on. He's my other help. And he's also my mama's best friend. He was with her when she died. He was with her throughout her life. He's a very, very special ancestor to me and to us who have come to understand him in that way. So working together is another way that we can reconcile. To keep working together for the concerns that we share in common, like the environment. To work together towards peace and harmony. And Indigenous people can help with these things. I heard the elder speak today, and every time I hear the Coast Salish people, I hear it because I've heard it before. We share that knowledge. We share that ability to cross those barriers, even in your speech. You can touch the hearts of people. And I love that about our people, and I hope that more people can feel that and understand. I know some of you, probably a lot of you do, that are here. To be able to live in close quarters, like our people did in a longhouse, to get along, all families all together. In the teepee communities, everybody had a role. Nobody was lazy. Everybody had their job. We knew how to get along. We knew how to do it. Someone said we had the gift of the science of relationships. We were stewards of the earth. This is what we do. This is how we do it. Are we done? Okay. All right. So anyway, yeah, and play together. Come to the Native or National Native Ministries, or National Aboriginal Day celebration, June 13th in Vancouver. Go to Hummingbird website and you'll see it. Thank you. God bless you.
We have one more speaker. I'd like to call to the podium our final speaker, Douglas White.
Asiam na siaya, Einthapek Walasalton, Tanis na Nemo, Ait na Squalwin, Qonas I. Heit Sepka, Siam Stimoch. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kwalasalton and Cleishan, Douglas White. I'm a member of the Snuneymuxw First Nation over in Vancouver Island, right across the water from us. We had a summer fishing village over here on the Fraser where we'd spend parts of the summer with our relations. I want to give greatest recognition and respect to my relations over here that were gathered up in their territory to talk about and to think about this important moment, what I see as a defining moment in our country's history. This is a moment when we need to grapple with and understand that there's a number of different threads of potential reconciliation in front of us that have been driving over the past number of decades to this critical moment we're in. Over the past 50 years, there's been a lot of legal work, starting with cases from half a century ago like White and Bob through to the decisions in recent years like the Ahousa decision, the Tsilhqot'in Nation decision from last summer, and indeed the litigation that prompted the work that we have in front of us today. That the legal process has been an important part of driving an understanding and a recognition and bringing into the room and putting to the table for all of us the issues and the fight, the conflict, and seeking resolution through that forum. We know, of course, that the legal process is a hyper-adversarial one. If you're really looking for true reconciliation, believe me, don't turn to lawyers and to courts. And I'm speaking as a lawyer in this regard. This is an ugly process of adversarialism, where there's winners and there's losers at the end of the day. But all of that work was an important step and an important moment where, when the time came, there was a period of Canadian history where advocacy itself was outlawed by the Canadian state, where great leaders from the Squamish like Andy Paul, Peter Kelly from the Haida went to Ottawa to put forward to the Joint Committee of the Senate and Commons this Indian land question. What is this stuff all about? They asked for them to come out and talk. And the response that they got, notwithstanding the great dignified advocacy that they had put forward on behalf of their own nations and all nations in British Columbia, the response they got was not a recognition that, yes, in fact, there is incredible outstanding business. There is deep injustice in British Columbia. The response was, in fact, to outlaw the very act of advocacy from 1927 to 51. But when that opened up, First Nations started to stand up again in the legal process. One of the early ways that they could seek to drive a different kind of dialogue, a different kind of reality. It prompted different politics. I was so thankful to hear from the representative from the Jewish community earlier speaking about his own experience as a Holocaust survivor and his own work, the way him and his people have approached this kind of work. The world began to shift into a different way of thinking about how to treat each other, about the universal humanity of all peoples. And so during this time, we also had the Universal Declaration of the Rights of People, recognizing that we're all humans and that we have to figure out how to change our behavior to each other. And so over the past half century, all of our peoples have been grappling with trying to make something of this. And in Canada, it's been a difficult process. It's been a difficult history. My own mother went to the Alberni Residential School with her brother and other members of the family. On my father's family, many members went to different residential schools. My grandmother, Kolosalwat, tells the chilling story of hanging on the windowsill of the residential school at Cooper Island and asking, why can't I go to this residential school? How come I can't be in school with my cousins? Because the Coast Salish world was split in half in 1846, and there became a Canadian side and an American side, and she was born on the American side. And so when she was a little girl, now living with her family on Cooper Island, Penalakat, they didn't recognize her as a Canadian Indian. And so for that remarkable fluke, a total happenstance of her and a number of her cousins that were in the same position as she was, they weren't subjected to the horrors of this residential school experience. And in fact, it became a great gift because their old grandmother said to them, if you can't go to their school, you're going to go to my school. And she raised them up with all of the Snowiath, the traditional teachings, all of the sacred knowledge that still was maintained at that point. And so what a gift that has been for our family. But the broader themes, the broader trajectory that we find ourselves in now is that we see how the legal process can bring attention and can prompt. But I can assure you that we will not have reconciliation of any meaningful kind because the Supreme Court of Canada demands it, or because as a strong legal advocate I stand up and I start hitting people over the head with a lawsuit. When I think about, in my own work as the chief of the Nanaimo First Nation for 4 years, I thought about all of the work growing up in a hyper-political family of chiefs, elected chiefs, hereditary chiefs, families involved in court processes and legal processes, fighting for our peoples. You grow up and you learn to be a fighter. You learn what it means to stand up for your people and to demand respect and to push for and to fight for it. How many times I spent with my grandfather out on a fishing boat when I was a little boy. You look after your family. You protect them. You care for them. If they need somewhere to live, you provide for them. But it was very much a disposition, I think, born out of the experience of what we've heard talked about. This deep-rooted sense and this idea, this sick idea and ugly idea from a different time that devalues who Aboriginal peoples are, that questions their very humanity. This ugly idea that finds manifestation in far too many aspects of the current reality today. In my work at Nanaimo, I fought hard in the way that I've already discussed and described, and achieved historic things for my people, quadrupled their land base in a few short years through a reconciliation agreement with the provincial government, and I recognize the representatives that are here from the province that did that work with us. The day of the reconciliation agreement signing in Nanaimo, March 27, 2013, the local newspaper, the Nanaimo Daily News, didn't see it as an opportunity, a historic moment to celebrate a new reality. Instead, they took it as a moment to publish the most ugly, racist letter that did nothing but reflect those ugly ideas from the past. Aboriginal peoples have contributed absolutely nothing to society. And when I read this letter and everything that it said, it was like being punched in the stomach. Because that's the power of words. This is a basic teaching from my grandmother. You be careful what you say. You always be very careful what you say. Words have incredible power. I read those words and I knew I never wanted my grandmother to read such ugly things being uttered on such an important and historic day. And we got up and we went through, and I knew that this would be the predominant thing of the day, notwithstanding that this was some of the most important work done in my own community in 100 years and longer. That what I would most be preoccupied with in the coming days was this ugly manifestation of racism and ideas, sentiments that my people don't matter. And so we stood up and we denounced the expression of those racist ideas. This is not something that happened 100 years ago. This is not something from some distant past, some other government's policy. This is not something that happened in our grandparents' time. This is something that happened yesterday. We need to be utterly and completely aware of the great challenge we have of grappling with the manifestations of these ideas in today's reality. That they continue to take place, they continue to hurt, they continue to limit the lives of people. The work that came out of our response to that experience that I've been sharing with you, we held a protest the next day, and I think what was truly remarkable about that protest was that maybe a generation ago it might not have even happened. But in this day, when I stood there as the chief of the Nanaimo with my members of my council, with us was not just other Aboriginal leaders, other community members from the Aboriginal community. The national chief happened to be in Vancouver, so he was able to get over that morning. But with us and standing with us, shoulder to shoulder, to denounce this ugliness, to make clear that speaking in this way and holding ideas like this about Aboriginal peoples is no longer a part of the way that we think about ourselves as a country, as a nation. It's the core of our identity. Was the mayor of Nanaimo and most of his council, all councillors that happened to be available, MLAs, MPs. It was remarkable, astonishing. And in the crowd, it was half Canadians, Asians, Caucasians, people from all walks of life were there with us, standing with us. It felt so beautiful to be supported in that way. We talked and we held at the university a series of reconciliation discussions in the community. Yes, it's important to denounce and to understand and to drag out into light these ugly ideas, but we must and we have to find ways to bring people together to talk about not just denouncing what we don't want, but building what we do. And I really started to understand that the work, the nature of the way that I'd been approaching my work through law and politics was necessary, but it was not sufficient. And I started to ask myself, what are the ingredients? What is the magic of real, meaningful social change? Because that's what's required. I think that's what, when we talk about reconciliation, we're talking about a fundamentally transformed society and reality in this country. What are the different ingredients of that? What sparks that? What can lead to that? And my understanding about social change is that it can either come through an experience of profound pain and suffering, or it can come from a people's, for whatever reason, a genuine turn towards deep engagement and respect and seeking understanding. I think in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process by itself, we have both of those ingredients that I understand to be the necessary elements of social change. And so my work, when I started to think about what do we need as the foundation of that, we heard the Chief Justice of Canada speak the other day about we've just experienced an attempt at cultural genocide in the past century. And the main theme of her discourse from there was tolerance. That we need to talk about and think about a tolerant society. One where we accept difference, recognize difference, that we're a plural society, that we're a multinational society. And I understand that, and I totally respect that idea. That's a necessary element of where we're at. But I want to be clear that in my own mind, when I think about the lives that I want for my children and grandchildren, I don't want them to be in a context where all we've done is to stop hurting each other and go to our respective corners and leave each other alone. It's absolutely critical to stop hurting each other. There is no doubt about that. I don't ever want anyone to suffer what my mother suffered or my uncle suffered or other members of my family suffered, what those 150,000 students suffered and their families. I swear to God, I will do everything in my power to ensure nothing like that ever happens again, and I trust everyone feels that way. But we think about, what do we want? How do I want my children to be treated? How do I want them to treat others? And we come to the phrase that was uttered by Chief Wilton Littlechild, I love you. Love. That I want my children to love and be loved by others in this country. I want altruistic love of both recognition and acceptance of difference, but also the caring, the concern for well-being of each other. That they're deeply engaged and wrapped up in each other's lives, as Nanaimo, as Squamish, as British Columbian, as someone from Vancouver, that we deeply care about each other. We know that we're in a difficult time, broadly speaking, in society where inequality has become a serious problem. This building itself is in a context where I think it's fair to say the reality of inequality could be no more clear when you step out of the front door of this building. I think there's a lot of reasons why these different threads are converging at this moment. We need to grapple with them, we need to respect and recognize them, and we need to do our work to take up the teachings of all of our collective peoples. I don't think there's a people on the face of the earth that don't understand what love is and how we want our children to be wrapped in it. So we need to find a way to rise up to the challenging moment that we're in, to hear what these remarkable people have to say about this particular experience in our country, what it intended to do, what it did achieve, the impacts that it had in the past, what it means for the way that it's shaped the present that we all live in, and to reflect upon what they've said about the different pathways of reconciliation that they can see from the lens that they've been looking at the current reality through, and start to weave in as well other threads of reconciliation. I think all things together, when we consider the great Supreme Court of Canada decision from last summer about Aboriginal title, the very first time in history finally being legally recognized. We see the great work of this commission, the people of Canada, to come to this point on this issue. That I don't think there's any other way to understand this moment than that we must return to the first principles of our relationship. We must return and bring ourselves back to a space. We must create this sacred space within which we can have the most meaningful conversations together to share with each other respectively who we are. To really clearly grapple with that question and articulate the answer to that basic question of who are we? What is our respective relationships with our families and our territories? What is our respective relationship with each other? And how are we going to live together in this land that's now come to be called Canada? It's going to be a challenging time. I think all of the necessary ingredients are there for profound change and for real difference. It's not going to come from reports. It's not going to come from Prime Minister's statements. It's not going to come from Supreme Court justices talking about cultural genocide. I think that if there's 30 million people that live in this country, then there's 30 million pathways towards the meaningful reconciliation that we have to build together. That it's ultimately, in terms of social change, an individual response, an individual imperative to do our part. So I'm happy to have had the opportunity to come here. I feel the great weight and burden of speaking on such a serious issue, such a heavy issue, an issue that's caused so much pain and suffering. But I reflect on, too, the impulse and the imperative to overcome that, the leadership that's been shown by so many individual survivors, by so many leaders of all kinds, that this is something to overcome. This is something to find strength from in some way. But that a clear recognition that what we do and the way that we spend our energy is to follow that basic Snow-Iathan teaching that we do what we can to ensure a better life for our children and grandchildren. And so with that, I say the deepest thank you to you all. Haitsepka, siya mastimoch. Love you all so much. Thank you.
I'm Ralph Nielsen, and I'm president at Vancouver University. I've got an announcement today, but I just want to make a couple of reflections before I do. First, I want to say thank you to the Coast Salish people for the welcome. Thank you very much to Chief Campbell for the song and sharing with us. Appreciate it very much, LAURIE. Thank you very much from SFU for sharing space today for us. And I really want to say thank you also, and I come here with a heart filled with gratitude from what we heard earlier this morning at 8 o'clock, when we heard gratitude and we heard appreciation from all the survivors, and we think about the welcome that we've received, it's the kind of welcome that I received when I came into Secnamic territory. It's a welcome that's been there for 200 years, even though the treatment hasn't always been the way it should be. But the welcome has always been there. And we heard today that welcome to reconcile. We've been welcomed to reconcile. So from my position at the university, and I've been very, very fortunate to learn from Doug, and Doug talked about his grandmother, Auntie Ellen. She was our first elder at the university. Elders that are hired into full-time positions as faculty, same salary scale as faculty, because we recognize there's different ways of knowing. We recognize there's different ways of understanding. And we recognize there's different ways of learning. And indeed, the value of that knowledge is as valuable as mine when I wandered around schools in North America to get my PhD. We recognize that value in all of us at the institution. I heard Murray Sinclair talk very much about deliberate, thoughtful, and sustained action. At Vancouver Island, we're doing that. Vancouver Island University. Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafon challenged us 2 years ago. The number of kids that are aging out of care, that have no opportunity, and the disproportionate number of those young people who are Aboriginal. Over 60% are Aboriginal. That is a clear demonstration of the intergenerational problems of residential schools. It's not a percentage that you see coming out of the population as a whole. Over 60%. That's intergenerational challenges of the residential schools that directly impact the families who are not able to keep their children and go out to foster care. So we open up the doors to all those children. And we open up the doors, it didn't matter what age you are. You come to school, you get an education, because indeed that's part of our responsibility for deliberate, thoughtful, sustained action. This fall we'll have 47 young people receiving a full tuition waiver, again, to make sure that we can address these pieces. We recognize also that there's a huge number of children that don't have money. Money's been capped. The Canada Learning Bond is another very thoughtful, deliberate action where the amount of money that's budgeted every year is high, the amount that's received is low, because people don't get registered for it, and especially in the First Nations communities. So we've got full-time staff working to change that number. It was an 11% uptake in our neighborhood. We're going to move it to 75% in 2 years. And it's thoughtful, deliberate action to make sure that these children know that they have a choice where they can go to school. And they can go to school at our school, they can go to any school in BC. But the point being, they can go to school, they have a choice, and it's their right and responsibility along with any other Canadian. So again, thoughtful, deliberate action. So I heard the words also today when Murray Sinclair was talking about commitment, connection, courage, and indeed love. We've heard love throughout. It's something that all of us within our institution are constantly looking to support. We've learned from the Secnamic, we've learned from the Cowichan, we've learned from Sliammon, all the Qualicum, all the communities that support us in the regions that we serve. And we recognize that we've got a responsibility for these dialogues. We recognize that we've got a responsibility to support the ongoing knowledge generation, because from the knowledge comes wisdom, from the knowledge comes understanding. And I've learned that in many of my conversations with Doug, his family, and many other people in the communities that we serve. It's been a real gift in that they've been willing to share. But they also, again, as we heard, knowledge must be shared. It must be shared. So we're very, very pleased today as a result of work of Doug, as a result of work of our Squeakwall, our former Chancellor Sean Atleo, as a result of the LAURIE Institute. We're announcing today that VIU is going to launch a speaker series on Indigenous peoples, an annual lecture that we'll send out across this country in partnership with CBC Radio 1 to make sure that we continue to raise the knowledge, we continue to provide understanding, and we continue to get into the kind of dialogues that we know are essential to learn from each other, respect each other, and continue to grow together. So thank you very much for the opportunity to announce that today. Thank you.
Thank you all. It has been a long day, and I'm hoping the mic won't pick up on my stomach grumbling because I am ready to get out there and share in this. Hopefully there's some refreshments. But I wanted to extend my deepest thanks on behalf of Karen Joseph and Chief Bobby Joseph, who are currently in Ottawa attending the closing ceremonies, as well as the Vancouver Organizing Committee for the TRC, who helped host this event. We are so honored to have you all with us and to have a room filled with all these different, ethnic, cultural, religious backgrounds. I know myself, I speak as someone who is a newcomer. I come from a crazy part of the world in the Middle East where there's a lot of hate, there's a lot of hurt, and I believe that I am an important actor in reconciliation here, and I believe in the power of the transformative power of reconciliation and what we can do as just average citizens, as community leaders, as political leaders, in that power of what we can do. So before we go, I know you guys are all eager, so just give me a second here. I want us all to repeat to our survivors and our intergenerational survivors these words. Okay, so if you feel like you want to repeat after me, please do. We are sorry. We love you. And we thank you. Thank you so much. Now, just as Doug White just said, words are strength, right? So let's go out and put those words into action. Thank you so much.